Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I thought I'd revisit a favourite album of mine because it's turning 50 years old this month, and it's the classic album from Supertramp, Crime of the Century, which I did review many years ago on my channel, but it's about time for a reappraisal with the anniversary coming up. I'll just show you my two copies of it. This is my UK original, which was not a gatefold, with the classic cover, and it came with the lyric sheet inside and the pictures of the band's suits, because they were naked with the suits there on the back. And that originally, that picture was supposed to be for the gatefold, but they changed it, but they kept the back cover anyway. But anyway, it's on the standard A&M label, and I've had this copy since around about 1978. I think I bought it, maybe 79. And then I picked up this copy, Audiophile series, which is a Canadian pressing of where they actually put it in a gatefold, so it's very interesting. Got the lyrics there, and the inner sleeve picture there with the song credits. The song credits are not on the back, just a bit of blurb about Audiophile. And so now you can see how the gatefold would have looked, even though they're not really looking at the cage, the angle's not quite right. But it's a brilliant album cover, it really is. It's a brilliant album, and Supertramp were known for their album covers, particularly this one and the next three albums, absolutely superb covers. And without further ado, let's talk about the music. Well, first of all, a few stats about how well it did. It got number 4 in the UK, not terribly well in the US at this stage, number 38, number 5 in Germany. And what I was quite surprised about is it was a huge hit in Canada. Peaked at number 4, but sold over 1 million copies. So for some reason, about twice as popular in Canada as it was in the UK in terms of sales. So that's quite interesting, if not more, because I think it didn't sell sort of hugely well in the UK initially, and was only given a sort of gold record or a platinum record a couple of years later. But this was the first album with what one refers to as the classic lineup. So you had Roger and Rick in the early days on the first two albums, but they had different drummers and bass players in those days. So they hired John Anthony Halliwell on sax and flute, wind instruments, Bob C. Benberg from America. John was English, Bob is from California, and he was on drums. And then they hired Dougie Thompson, Scotsman, on bass, and they proved to be just fantastic musicians and a fantastic compliment to Roger and Rick, and they really do get a great stage. I've seen them live once in '83, and by all accounts, whenever I've spoken to anyone who's seen them, my friend Roy Stewart saw them in '75 and said they were sensational. They do a pretty good replica of how it sounds on the record, although it's pretty difficult to sound as good as this record in particular, because Ken Scott, as I'll talk about in a bit, does such a brilliant job. So what makes this album so special? Well, I think one of the reasons is because Rick and Roger are writing very personal songs. They're writing about their insecurities, and they're very introspective lyrics. One can relate to them. And one has to remember that particularly Roger was only 23 when he wrote these songs. So a song like Hide in Your Shell is talking about his insecurities. And my son Richie is 24 now. He's older than Roger was when he wrote Hide in Your Shell, so that's quite interesting. So what else do I say? Rick is 6 years older. He was born in 1944, so he was sort of touching 30 when he was writing these songs. And what's interesting is they had 15 songs to choose from. They selected these 8, and among the ones that they could have selected were Just a Normal Day, which turned up on Crisis What Crisis, and From Now On, which turned up on Even in the Quietest Moments. So I thought that was very interesting. So to the songs, well, it opens brilliantly with School, and Roger he went to boarding school, and allegedly it left him with many questions. I don't think he was quite as unhappy at boarding school as, say, Roger Waters was, but he didn't have a brilliant experience, and it's talked about in this song, School. The second verse goes, after school is over, you're playing in the park. Don't be out too late, don't let it get too dark. They tell you not to hang around and learn what life's about and grow up just like them. Won't let you work it out and you're full of doubt. So that's just a very interesting prelude to the logical song which he would write 5 years later for Breakfast in America. And it's a brilliant song. It's mainly written by Roger, but Rick comes in and sings his bit and contributes quite a few of the lyrics and contributes the absolutely sensational piano solo. But when Roger does it live, he gets someone else to do the brilliant piano solo, and I think of it as mainly Roger's song with stupendous input from Rick instrumentally, in particular, and lyrically as well. So then it's fascinating that these songs kind of answer each other. There's a bit of a theme of kind of alienation and looking for the answer, and Bloody Well Right from Rick, who's a working class lad who did not go to boarding school in England, and he opens the song with, so you think your schooling is phony, guess it's hard not to agree. You say it all depends on the money and who is in your family tree. So he's being pretty sort of scathing there, and but Roger's playing superb guitar on that track, and it's just a great 1-2 punch to open the album. And it's interesting how at the time when I first heard it and I was playing it in the car, I was a bit embarrassed in front of my parents with the swearing, and it's sort of very mild swearing of Bloody Well Right. Seemed a bit risque at the time in the mid-70s. Now it's absolutely nothing compared to what people get away with now. But at the time it was it was a bit risque. So Hide in Your Shell is next, and it's just a perfect song. I think I said it on my last review. Jeremy Clarkson, the famous UK TV personality, said this is about the greatest song of all time. And it's just a wonderful song, and just wonderful harmonies from the band, mainly John and Rick and Roger are singing the harmonies together, and great words, and superb instrumentation, and just the way the band gels. They must have had a time recording it, because it just sounds absolute perfection. Talking of which, if you went into a hi-fi shop back in the day, in the 70s, early 80s even, and you asked to sort of try out the latest turntable or the latest speakers, they would invariably either reach for this album to play you a sort of demonstration of the speakers, or Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd. I do remember those two albums being particularly sort of big in the sort of audiophile world, and it's not surprising because they both sound brilliant. And Ken Scott does an absolutely brilliant job. Apparently when he was played the demos, he wasn't too keen on them. And then sort of someone persuaded him that A&M were very keen that he should work with the band, so he said, okay, I will. And then he just completely was bowled over eventually by the songs, and saw their potential, and just came up with all this trickery, and well, trickery is not really the right word, so these techniques to make songs even better than they already were. And for example, in the next song, Asylum, quite a simple piano ballad, but Ken Scott's made sure it's arranged brilliantly with almost an entire orchestra playing behind Rick's voice, and it just builds up in tension, and it just turns the song into an absolute masterpiece. Even though it's not my favourite on the album, it works incredibly well in the context of the album. And Dreamer opens side 2, and probably if there's any song which maybe doesn't fit so well on the album, it's this one. It's a little bit out on its own because it was so commercial, and it's probably my least favourite on the album. But having said that, it was a huge hit single. It was a breakthrough single for them, and Roger recorded it pretty early on at his mother's house with his new sort of Wurlitzer keyboard thing, and he got a superb demo done. And when the band came to do it, they couldn't quite replicate the magic of that early demo, so they spent a long time trying out ideas, and it does work out a masterful production. And when I say it's not my favourite. It's still a great track. So let's get things into perspective. And Rudy is, well, possibly the best track on the album, and just another really introspective lyric about this character Rudy, who's, one presumes, is a sort of semi-autobiographical portrait of Rick, who wrote the song. And Ken Scott adds tremendous atmosphere to the song by having the actual announcer from Paddington Station, or what sounds very like the announcer, saying the train at platform 4 is for Bristol Temple Meads, calling at Reading, Didcot Parkway, Swindon, Bristol Parkway and Bristol Temple Meads. Now this may just sound like a train to listeners, but actually there's a hidden meaning here, because Roger Hodgson, although he was born in Portsmouth, he was brought up after sort of his early years in just outside Oxford in this place Didcot Parkway, and Rick was just down the line in Swindon. So that train announcement actually passes through Roger's one-time home and Rick's birthplace. So I thought it was interesting, and it's just a superb sort of build-up, and with sort of counter vocals from Roger, just works well. And when they do it live, they had the train track going sort of fast, from the view of the train going down the track. Very effective that was. So yeah, absolute knockout of a track. And if everyone was listening, some people say it's not the best track on the album, but it's about my favourite, along with Rudy, I would say. Inspired by, I think, the Shakespeare line, all the world's a stage and all the people are the players, and just very philosophical words. And what is your costume today, and who are the props in your play? You're acting a part which you thought from the start was an honest one. Well, how do you plead? An actor indeed. Go relearn your lines. You don't know what you've done. The finale has begun. If everyone was listening, there'd be a chance that we could save the show. Heartfelt lyric from Roger, and just a beautiful tune. And then the climax of the album is the title track, Crime of the Century, and Roger, he's on the record and saying more people have come up to him and said they are moved by this song than virtually any other Supertramp song. And it's quite enigmatic. I mean, it obviously features on the cover here, but it's not about anyone in particular. And Roger was asked, is it about Nixon? He said, nothing to do with Nixon. Just a sort of hypothetical crime of the century. And by the way, I'll talk about the artwork in a bit. So Ken Scott, who produced this album, tremendous resume. He'd worked with Elton on Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player, Neil Schmielsen, Bowie, Hunky Dory, Ziggy, Lad Insane, George Harrison, All Things Must Pass. He was an assistant engineer on several of the Beatles albums, from A Hard Day's Night through to Rubber Soul, I think, and also on Sgt. Pepper. Then he became a sort of main engineer on Magical Mystery Tour and White Album. He worked on Lou Reed Transformer. So as you can see, there was a bit of a coup to get Ken Scott, and he just does a brilliant job. He really does. But he gets tremendous support from Richard Hewson, who supplies the strings, the orchestration for this album. And that's a name you might recognise, because he also did the notorious, but some say wonderful, string arrangement for Long and Winding Road from the Let It Be album from the Beatles, and also I Me Mine. And then also went on to do Thrillington for Paul McCartney, which was an early 70s version of the Ram tracks. And you would think if Paul McCartney was so upset with Long and Winding Road, he wouldn't have hired him a couple of years later to do Thrillington, but he did. That was an interesting connection, which I don't think I'd made before. And the album is dedicated to Sam, which was their sort of nickname for a Dutch gentleman who funded them in the very beginning, in, I think 1969, gave them some cash to get started. So that was a nice dedication. So what is are we going to come back to what is special about Supertramp? And it comes down, I think, to the yin and the yang of Rick and Roger. They're very different personalities, and one has to think of Lennon and McCartney as a comparison in terms of two different personalities, but the combination of which sort of leads to complete magic, and it certainly did up until Breakfast in America, and then after that they kind of fell out a bit and had little to contribute to each other's work on the famous Last Words album. That was the last one they did together. So some people, unfortunately, Supertramp hasn't really deserved the credit it's deserved over the years. I mean, there's no great revival or resurgence of interest. And this album is 50 years old, and it's about time it got reappraised, and sort of it does occasionally feature in these top 500 albums of all time, but never particularly highly. My brother Richard complains about Roger Hodgson's whiny voice, which I think is a bit ridiculous. It's a bit like saying you don't like Dylan's voice. You know, it's totally subjective, and you know, one has to listen to the words and everything to appreciate the whole package. But Roger's got a wonderful voice. It just happens to be very high, but there's nothing wrong with that. I don't like when everyone labels Supertramp as a prog rock band. I'm not really sure what prog rock means. If it means pretentious, I don't think they're guilty here. Although their contemporaries, Genesis, I think, went in the pretentious direction. I just think prog rock is not a bit of a meaningless phrase, and I would just tend to point out the musicianship and the quality of the songwriting. So I tried to think of a few things which you may not have realised about this album, rather than repeating myself. John Bonham praised this album, said the drumming is great. I thought that was very interesting. As I mentioned before, it was a big hit in Canada. Some of you may not have known that. The Richard Hewson connection was certainly new to me, or maybe I'd realised it before, but I'd forgot about it. Now, this artwork was designed by Paul Wakefield, and he got his twin brother to hold the bars there after putting whitening on them. And originally it was going to be a sort of face looking out through the bars, but they decided to go with just the hands, sort of almost like saying there's no hope of getting out. The stars sort of effect was apparently just using a black card with lots of pinpricks in it to let the light through. So I thought that was interesting and very simple but effective. And then I hadn't noticed there was a few red stars here, like here. Can you see it? And then a couple here in the middle, a couple of red stars. I don't know if that was just put in there for a laugh. So the CD Deluxe set comes with a live concert from March 75, which they do the whole of side one of Crime. Then they do 4 songs from Crisis What Crisis, Sister Moonshine, Just a Normal Day, Another Man's Woman and Lady. Then they go back and do the side 2 of Crime of the Century. So this is a wonderful double CD pack. I think they produced a deluxe pack similar to that for Breakfast. They're yet to produce a deluxe pack for Crisis and Quietest Moments, unfortunately. But as I said, they do get a very good sound live, but it's not quite as good as one always tends to go back to the studio, at least I do with Supertramp, and that includes the Paris album, which came out in 1980. It's decent, but it's not quite on the same level for me. Amusing story about when Supertramp were getting started on their first US tour. They sort of had to sort of give away tickets to get people to come in and see them. And Bob C. Benberg said he had to do 3 solos a night because they were so short of material. And in one of these gigs, he got very nervous because Carl Radle and Jim Gordon walked in and sat down. So it was a bit of a nervous wreck. So I thought that was an interesting story. So this is Crime of the Century. Happy 50th. Great album, great work from all 5 members, great songwriting from Rick and Roger, and great production from Ken Scott. So thanks and well done to all involved, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.